Welcome to another edition of Boxing Info. I'm your host, The Islander, and this is the week of December 26th through the 30th, or 31st, end of the year. Listen, my apologies for not doing a video last week. All I would be doing is reviewing the fight that I'm going to review today, which is the fight that I picked wrong, which was Bernard Hopkins' going away party in what do you call it, Inglewood, California, in his last fight. Bear with me 1 second as I just the computer's like this. This is being done on a notebook with a webcam, and behind it's my big monitor or whatnot with my data on it, which I cannot what do you call it see half the time. And then when I have to move the mouse on this one, it's to keep the screensaver from coming on. But anyway, let's get down to it. I picked this fight wrong, and one of the reasons why is I don't know how many times I've told you over the past 9 years, almost 10 years now, that great fighters like Bernard Hopkins, like Sugar Ray Leonard, like Marvin Hagler, like any of them, and I always come back to this one fight, which was the most shocking to me, uh, even more so than what happened a week ago Saturday, and it was back in 1984. The whole theme to this, or the whole point to this whole story, is that I've been telling you for 9.5 years that great fighters overreach at the end of their career, and one day they wake up and their reflexes don't work the way they used to. They're just a tiny little itsy bitsy bit off, and an ordinary fighter makes the legend look ordinary. And that's pretty much what happened. So I kind of haven't. I just thought that the skill set between Hopkins, who had a nice long, almost 2 year rest after Sergey Kovalev beat him pillar to post, but he was able to score some punches and stay on his feet. And I remember what I said in the preview video. How is Joe Smith Jr. going to hurt Hopkins when Kovalev couldn't? Well, I didn't take into account that Bernard Hopkins' reflexes would slip just enough. They had already slipped against Kovalev. They were slipping even more. And I want to say this about this fight before I get into it, because I'm going to get back to the story I was telling you, that Max Kellerman probably did the best job I've ever seen him do in describing that, and I couldn't have said this better myself, that the difference in fight to fight at age 50 is like the difference between 15 fights or 20 fights for somebody who's in their mid 30s. That the fight from Kovalev to Joe Smith Jr. was like basically 20 fights on top of, if Floyd Mayweather was to come back, it would be as if he had 20 fights. The wear and tear, or the lack of being able to react to punches, being able to punch, and this is something that's not measurable. That's what the problem is. And the fight I always go back to is way back in the spring, I don't know if it was April or May, the spring of 1984, in which the WBA bantamweight champion, Jolton Jeff Chandler, was defending his title for the 10th time, and he looked to be in the prime of his career, looked to be absolutely at the top of his game when he stepped into the ring against Richie Sandoval, who I had seen fight many times on ESPN, and was supposed to have, I think, gone to the 1980 Olympics before the U.S. boycotted the Olympics in Moscow. He had an advanced amateur background, and there was a lot of clout around him, although he had some up and down performances on ESPN, most notably against Harold Petty Jr., where he was in what I thought a fight that could have went to Harold Petty the first time. In the second fight, we was going to right the ship. It wasn't all that convincing, even though he won both fights. So he was what my dad would call who's gone now, an ESPN crap, a guy that would be elevated to a world championship fight on network TV, similar to Bruce Finch, who basically had an NABF welterweight title and got a shot at Sugar Ray Leonard after the first fight after Sugar Ray Leonard unified with Tommy Hearns and got blown away. So this was the same kind of fighter that my dad was characterizing Richie Sandoval to be, even though I thought he was more solid than Bruce Finch. And what unrolled that afternoon in spring of 1984 was an absolute domination. And it happened because overnight, Jeff Chandler's reflexes just diminished a microscopic amount. That's it. A microscopic amount. It wasn't measurable. But it was enough for a very good fighter like Richie Sandoval to dominate him and stop him in the 15th round. And every fight, when a fighter gets old, Jeff Chandler was not old. Understand that. He was in the prime of his career. At least we, the folks who watched him fight, the writers who wrote about him, the magazines that wrote about him, thought he was at the top of his career. He was at the pinnacle. And all of a sudden, overnight, this happened. Now, a lot of credit has to be given to Sandoval. And how that translates to what happened is that all fighters that I watch, and I keep waiting for them, especially skill fighters, the same thing that happened to Jeff Chandler happens to all of them. It happened to be very abrupt with him. And when they get older and they get into their 30s and they have a lot of miles on, here we go again with the screensaver, a lot of miles on their drivetrains, as I like to compare boxers to automobiles. There's a lot of miles. There's a ton of miles on Bernard Hopkins' transmission. Let's put it that way, okay? He never really revved the engine into redline. If we're going to use the car analogy, he was never redlining it, basically, Hopkins. But he was shifting gears hard on his transmission. Doing donuts around the parking lot a few times in the way he fought. So there's a lot. Engine wasn't that used, but the transmission was. And Joe Smith Jr. right from the get-go was the more active fighter, boxer that night. Hurt Hopkins in the first round with a right hand off the top of his head. And then pretty much, with the exception of the fourth round, I thought dominated almost every round in the fight. Hopkins had some, glimmers of hope. And what I would say is there was some excellence where he did. I would say there were like brief moments in the fight where he was outclassing Joe Smith Jr. when he let his hands go. But the reality is he couldn't sustain those moments for more than just a moment. A round is 3 minutes long. That's a lot of moments, okay? You either have to have multiple moments and move and get out of the way and dance and clinch and all the things he knows how to do. But when you have a guy who's willing to let his hands go, and I'm going to say this in great admiration of Joe Smith Jr., one of my fellow Long Islanders, is that this is 2 weeks in a row that HBO has broadcast a fight in which the underdog, Joe Smith Jr. being one of them, and Mr. John Molina basically threw caution to the wind. Molina got stopped by Terrence Crawford, but it wasn't from lack of trying. He wasn't trying to survive. He was trying to do everything he could to press the fight. We've already been through this twice. Same thing with Joe Smith Jr. If he was going to lose this fight, he was going to go out on his shield, and he was not going to leave any cards on the table. So as the fight progressed, and I have to agree with Harold Letterman, I think the guy coming forward, the guy throwing more punches, the guy landing more punches, is the guy winning the fight. The three judges had it a lot closer. One judge inexplicably had Hopkins ahead. I don't know what in the hell that guy was watching, that girl was watching, whoever it was. I have no idea. So as the 8th round comes along, here I'm sitting here watching this fight thinking, okay, the fight's probably going to 12 rounds. Hopkins is the best at keeping out of the way of harm's way. He's already been hurt by the right hand. He knows to stay away from it. He's doing a good job of moving to his right to stay away from the right hand. And not even a minute into the 8th round, he gets tagged with another right hand with his back to the ropes. But this time, he gets tagged with a follow-up combination, and next thing you know, he goes flying through the ropes. Down, not onto the ring apron, but down to the floor, where it looks like he was lucky to get his chin up or something, or else he would have cracked his head something fierce on the floor. I guess twisted his ankle in the melee. And what I'm liking is that nobody's over there. I know there weren't any seats, because it was almost where the corner, if you could see how I'm doing my hands here, almost to the corner is where this happened, and there weren't many seats there, and nobody tried to catch him, which I don't understand. Usually when fighters go through the ropes, either the photographers or the ring officials or the commissioner officials will try to actually break their fall by holding him. They just let him flop right out. It's almost like as if they were taking a corpse and just basically just lifting the coffin up and the body just shot right out. That's exactly what it looked like. So I don't know what the California officials were thinking or not thinking, just letting him fall head first to the floor. Look, he at that point in time he wasn't winning the fight. I know they issued the 20 count, and he looked like he was okay, but didn't want to get back in the ring. He hurt his ankle. I don't know whether he thought they were going to go to the scorecards. It was going to be like a technical decision, or what was going through his mind at that point. Understanding he was, he had his bell rung, but I think that Joe Smith Jr. My initial thoughts are that he won this fight because, one, he was in very good shape, he studied really well, he trained really hard, he was dedicated to this, and more importantly, he wasn't a one-punch fluke. When you fought Andrew Fonfara, I thought he caught him by surprise and caught him cold. But the thing is, he catches these guys with straight right hands. They're not these winging left hooks or these crazy kind of punches that some wild man throws. I mean, he's doing it with a classic jab right hand. So what does his future hold? I mean, he looks like a very big, strong light heavyweight. Here we go again with this damn screensaver. I think his people should take it slow, because this is very similar to that guy that beat Mike Tyson in Louisville. Why is that guy's name elude me right now? He stopped Tyson in like four or five rounds. Tyson hurt himself and he went down against the ropes and got counted out. Next thing you know, they're throwing that guy in with Vitaly Klitschko, and he got absolutely demolished. And I think that when they were talking at ringside, Kellerman and Lampley to Roy Jones Jr., I think Roy Jones Jr. hit it right on the head, and he said, he's not ready for Andre Ward or Sergey Kovalev. It doesn't mean he won't be ready for them. He's not ready for them right at this point, because I think they would tear him up right now. I think he needs to keep progressing and fighting contenders and threatening contenders like, Fonfara, and maybe even go after the Tavares Clouds if they're still fighting, and guys like that. Babit Shumanov. I mean, work up to those guys and then work to the top, because I don't. What you have to figure is, with a guy like this who has fought pretty much nondescript competition up until Fonfara and Hopkins, there's more wrinkles to be ironed out of his Superman suit. Let's put it that way. There's wrinkles to be ironed out, and they need to get ironed out at the B level and the A level before going to the elite level. I don't like doing that. It's not even on the camera. I said, the B level, the A level, the elite level before getting to the elite level. And that's all I'm going to say about that fight. I was surprised. I picked Hopkins to win. I was wrong, and I went against my own cardinal rules, where basically when a guy advances in age, especially a skill fighter, which Hopkins became after he unified the middleweight title, all it takes is for them to lose a microscopic amount of their reflexes overnight, and this is what happens. It's happened to Jeff Chandler, it's happened to Sugar Ray Leonard, it's happened to Donald Curry, it's happened to all of them. It happens to all of them. It happened to Ray Boom Boom Mancini when he fought Haugen. He no way were his reflexes the same as when he fought Camacho a few years earlier, or when he was fighting Livingstone Bramble 7 years earlier. I mean, the reflexes were off by a little bit, and that's what makes what I would call an ordinary fighter destroy a once A-level fighter. And Hopkins was an elite level fighter. Now, with this said, because we're rolling up on the end of the year, and already ESPN and a lot of other people are putting up. I understand Carl Frampton's been voted the fighter of the year, which I've got no problems with. And I think that as he is signed for a rematch with Leo Santa Cruz, I didn't cover that fight, and I would have thought Santa Cruz was going to win that fight too. But in watching it, I understand why Frampton won, and the reasons why he won the first fight is the reason why he's going to win the second fight. And I'm only going to talk about this briefly, and that is, in that fight, Leo Santa Cruz comes from a mold that the Republic of Mexico cast. Like golf clubs are either cast or forged. Well, it doesn't matter whether it's cast or forged. There's a mold, and maybe they forged these boxers into different molds. And you've got like the barrel-chested left hooker like Ruben Olivares and Lupe Pintor and several others. And then you got this other mold that's what I call the tall, fight on the inside kind of guy. And the mold was started or forged with Antonio Margarito. And then they poured Humberto Soto into that mold. And out he comes fighting a little bit tighter than Margarito. And then comes Leo Santa Cruz, who's poured in that same exact mold, and he's tighter than all of them. He looks better than all of them. He's but he still fights in the same mold that those two fought. So that's what I call the Margarito mold. And Leo Santa Cruz comes from the Margarito mold. He's better defensively than Margarito. He has better boxing skills than Margarito, and Soto too. But he does not. He's not going to kill somebody from the outside like Tommy Hearns would. He's not going to kill somebody from the outside like Eric Morales would. He's not going to beat somebody from the outside like Marco Antonio Barrera would, or Salvador Sanchez. He has to give up his height and lean forward to basically hammer a guy on the inside. And with Carl Frampton, he gets his punches off a half a step faster than Santa Cruz does. So what happened in the first fight is going to happen again over and over again in the second fight. More importantly about Frampton is that he looks far more stronger on his legs and his feet at 126 pounds. And I believe that his punch carries more force at 126 pounds. He's been drained down. Now he's fighting comfortable weight. And I feel that this fight in the coming year, he's going to... this is all stemmed off of this tangent I'm going on, is all stemmed off of basically the Carl Frampton being named the Fighter of the Year by ESPN, or at least the article I read. And I expect him to beat Leo Santa Cruz again. Okay, now, some of you have asked me about... somebody on my last video, on the comments, asked me about who the greatest Puerto Rican boxer of all time is. And I didn't have time to research this because I did a video a long time ago on the old Stork JMC channel that got taken down back in 2009. And it was Angel asked me this. And Angel asked, he thinks that, I'm trying to think of who he thought, that maybe Cotto and somebody else was better. The guy in his office said Wilfredo Gomez was better than Carlos Ortiz, and he thinks Ortiz and Cotto are better. I'm going to go on the limb of saying this, that I think that Cotto's body of work is very good. Trinidad's body of work is just as good. And I'm going to say this about, Gomez. If you look at, when I look at these guys, I look at who has, a very high winning percentage, who has a very high number of world title fight wins, who has, the knockout percentage, the all-around boxer. I mean, Ivan Calderon can be considered one of the best pound-for-pound Puerto Rican boxers of all time. One that gets lost in the mix way back in the black and white film era days is their first world champion, Sixto Escobar, the bantamweight champion of the world, who fought a trilogy with Harry Jeffra of Baltimore. He is generally thought of as the greatest Puerto Rican fighter of all time. And the other one I would say, I would say this, that Gomez is at the top, probably not the best. I think Carlos Ortiz holds rank over probably both Gomez, Trinidad, and Cotto. And one that keeps getting lost in the mix is Jose Torres, the light heavyweight. His body of work doesn't compare to Gomez or to Ortiz or to Trinidad. But the time at which he fought, he was he was fighting amongst very, very tough competition. When I talk about Dick Tiger and I talk about Willie Pastrana and those guys. So take him into consideration. I don't know if there is a clear-cut number one in Puerto Rico, in my opinion. Okay, now, Mr. Why is my mind going blank? I don't know, I'm thinking of too many things I need to drink. Basically, we've got some dream fights to talk about. And I think this is a good thing to do when there's not much going on, because there's not a world title fight coming up until Erisande Lara fights Yuri Foreman in a couple of weeks, in about 3 weeks. So, here are some fights that were put forth on the last video, and I will go ahead and delve into them. Julio Cesar Chavez versus Azuma Nelson, 130 pounds. A fight I think should have been made, and I think that the reason why this wasn't made is because Don King promoted both of them. So, there was almost like a, I would say almost like a factory of fighters with Don King back in the late 80s and early 90s. and even starting in the early '80s, going through the '90s, in which an assembly line is what I'm looking for. There was an assembly line, and basically, where it started 126 and then it went up to 130 and 135 and 140 and 147, and this assembly line that Don King had going. So, and it started way back even when Alexis Arguello was fighting, and Don King had basically had promoted some of his fights. So you had Julio Cesar Chavez, or I should say Hector Macho Camacho at 130. Julio Cesar Chavez wasn't even in the picture. Azuma Nelson was at 126. Camacho goes to 135. Chavez wins his vacant title. Nelson's right below at 126. The best fights that could have been made in the 80s, besides Nelson fighting Jeff Fennick and Antonio Esparragosa and Barry McGuigan, was these Don King fighters fighting each other. So I always wanted to see Chavez against Camacho at 135, not 10 years later at 140, or 8 years later at 140. I wanted to see Chavez versus Camacho at 135. I also wanted to see Nelson against Chavez at 130. And I really think that Nelson's best weight was 126, even though the body of work that he did was better at 130. With the exception of losing to Salvador Sanchez in a very close fight when he was only at 13 pro fights, he never lost again at 126. Now, Chavez was at his devastatingly best at 130, and the couple of fights he had at 135, his absolute best. Over 12 rounds, Chavez would have beaten Nelson, not stopped him, but beaten him comprehensively. The same way he eventually beat Juan Laporte and Rocky Lockridge and Danilo Cabrera. He was too big, he was too strong, he was too skilled. Nelson would be in the fight to the very end, understand this. And I'm thinking very much like an 8 rounds to 116, 112 kind of decision for Chavez. But it would have been there would have been some very tense moments for both of them in that fight. But I think Chavez was too big, too strong, too many weapons. That was the thing. He had too many different shots, not just a right hand, not just a left hook, not just left hook to the body, too much to defend against. Nelson, same way. But Chavez was very underrated defensively. He blocked a lot of punches that people thought he was hit by. So in a very close fight, 8 rounds to 4, 7 rounds to 5, I'll take Chavez over Nelson at 130. All right, Tommy Hearns versus Carlos Monzon at 160. Here's the situation. Hearns fought in 15-round title fights. Monzon fought in 15-round title fights. This would have been a 15-round title fight. And Hearns at 160 was never as dangerous as he was at 147. Monzon, in history, was by far the best fighter doing what Hearns did best, which was fighting tall and fighting long. And he would have eventually caught Hearns with a shot, whether it would have been a right hand or a left hook, and would have stopped him late. And I'm thinking the 11th, 12th, 13th round, somewhere in there, where Hearns' legs started failing him. There would have been some anxious moments for Monzon where he would have got caught on the end of a couple of Hearns' right hands, maybe even got knocked down like Rodrigo Valdez did to him. But he was very big and strong for 160. Monzon was, and I when you actually offered that as a dream fight, Arnold Wayne, that is, I started watching some old Carlos Monzon fights and watching highlights of them, and I was thinking to myself, there is no way in hell. If Juan Domingo Roldan was able to hurt Tommy Hearns, trust me that Monzon would have hurt him and probably would have knocked him out. It would have been a one-punch knockout. It would have been an accumulation of punches. Very similar to the way Monzon stopped the guy he beat the title, the Italian guy that he won the title from. My mind is going blank. I need to go get Prevagen or something. I just keep forgetting things that I know by heart. I don't know what the deal is. Next fight, a really good one. Vicente Saldivar against Azuma Nelson. You may be surprised, but this would have been a one-sided demolition derby for Azuma Nelson. Saldivar would have had his moments in the fight early, and Nelson would have knocked him out. And I'm talking about in there, both of them in their primes. Would have knocked him out in the middle to late rounds. Because unlike Julio Cesar Chavez, Saldivar, a lefty, didn't have a multitude of offensive weapons to worry Nelson, and he didn't have the size either. Nelson was just as big, if not bigger, than Saldivar, and I believe in my heart that Nelson would have beaten him very similar to the way he beat Wilfredo Gomez. It would have looked just like that, in my opinion. Or his fight against Lupe Suarez up at 130. It would have looked very similar. There would have been anxious moments for Nelson along the way, but he would have got to Saldivar just like he got to those two guys in those two fights. The next fight, Julio Cesar Chavez, you put at 135 against Nicolino Lochet. I think that fight would have been better. Lochet's best weight was at 140. And at that stage in their careers, we're talking about Lochet fighting 15-round fights, Chavez never fighting a 13th round. That I could see that going either way. And when I say either way, I could see Lochet winning a decision over Chavez. But then again, I could also see Chavez getting to his body, which nobody else did. And basically wearing him out where he took over in rounds and won a decision. Or I think Lochet was so good defensively that if Dwight Pratchett could last 12 rounds with Chavez, I think Nicolino Lochet could have. And I'm saying that only because Dwight Pratchett wasn't really in there to win the fight after the third or fourth round. He was in there to survive. And I really truly believe that if Sammy Fuentes could make it 10 rounds, or Roger Mayweather could make it 10 rounds, that Nicolino Lochet was better than them defensively, and he would have made it. And I think this is a flip of a coin, because I think that over 15 rounds, Chavez would have probably caught up to him and hurt him really bad to the body, and maybe stopped him or maybe overtaken him and win it. It would have been close either way. It would either been a close Chavez decision or it would have been a close Nicolino Lochet decision. And that would have been either if it was, I think 12 rounds, Lochet probably had a better chance. In 15 rounds, I think the body work that Chavez would have done would have either maybe propelled him past him for a decision or stopped him late. But, Lochet was that's tough. I think that could have gone either way, actually. I really do. Because I think that, like I said, Lochet was, almost like at that time, a modern-day Willie Pep. Very vastly underrated, in my opinion. Vastly underrated. Okay, Marvelous Marvin Hagler versus Roy Jones Jr. at 160. All right. Here's the thing. There wasn't that much of a body of work of Roy Jones Jr. against high-quality fighters at 160. Marvin Hagler is an all-time great at 160. And I think that over a 15-round title fight, Marvin Hagler would have gotten him, or would have made Jones go into a shell and won a decision. I'm trying to think of, there's nobody that Hagler fought. The worst this would have looked like for Hagler is the Sugar Ray Leonard fight. The worst. And that was when Hagler fought his last fight. So we're talking about when Hagler was fighting Tony Simpson, or Hagler was fighting Caveman Lee. At this point in time, or fully oval, this Hagler against Roy Jones in his, fight against Bernard Hopkins, his fight against Thomas Tate. That's it. That's what we're taking from. And I truly believe that Hagler would have gotten him in the later rounds to win a decision. Or, I don't know about stopping him, because he would have been in Roy Jones's grill. And no amount of speed or power that Hagler was hit flush on by Tommy Hearns' right hand. And it only stopped him from moving forward momentarily. So I don't think there's anything Roy Jones would have hit Hagler with that would have deterred him from getting into Jones's grill and banging his arms and his body. So I'm going to lean towards Hagler in that one. The beauty of your dream fights are you never really know what would have or could have happened. There's only some of them where I look at and I say that guy's definitely going to win. Not with these. The only one I on this list that I know of for sure are Chavez Nelson and Nelson Saldivar. But the Hearns Monzon. What if Hearns hit him with a right hand, knocked him out in the first round? Highly unlikely. But same thing with Hagler and Jones Jr. Could have gone either way, just like Chavez and Lochet could have gone either way. That brings us to Carmine Basilio versus Sugar Ray Leonard at 147. Okay. I think this is one of the ones where, in more of a romantic sort of way, it looks like a good fight. But in reality, the pedigree of these two, Carmine Basilio was a true salt-of-the-earth fighter. And yes, he fought on very even terms with an older Sugar Ray Robinson, not the one that was in his prime. Basilio's best fights were against Johnny Saxton and Tony DeMarco and the guys at welterweight. When he fought Sugar Ray Robinson, he caught him post-Fulmer. I mean, Sugar Ray Robinson had a lot of miles on his drivetrain at that point when Basilio beat him. And then Robinson ripped the title right back from him in the rematch. I'm going to say Leonard, in his prime, would have beat Basilio fairly comfortably. And it would have been over 15 rounds. But he would have beaten him probably 10 rounds to 5 or 11 rounds to 4 or 9 rounds to 6. I mean, I think by at least 5 points easily. Over 15 rounds, Leonard would have beaten him. Because unlike with Robinson, when Basilio fought him, Leonard in his prime would have been a lot faster and hit very hard with both hands. Leonard didn't waste punches. When he punched, it was with bad intentions. And I think that Basilio was a strong guy who would have been able to stand up to it. But I think it would have, Leonard's punching power would have basically kept Basilio cautious enough to not throw caution at the wind. And I think over 15 rounds, Leonard would have pounded out a decision. The last one's one I have no idea, and this was Roberto Duran versus Aaron Pryor at 140. And we're looking at the time in which, let's say Aaron Pryor, the night he got into the ring with Alexis Arguello in Miami in the Orange Bowl in 1982, at the top of his career, versus the Duran who had just beaten Esteban de Jesus for the third time, and then was moving up and fighting Carlos Palomino before getting a shot at Sugar Ray Leonard. That Duran. It's a toss-up, and I don't know that Duran could get off the sustained number of shots to hurt Pryor, needed to hurt Pryor, because any one shot would not put Pryor away. And Pryor, how many times would he get caught? Because it's almost like both offenses would have offset each other, because they both were combination punches. Pryor, both of them with their chin up in the air a lot of the time. And I think that what would happen is it would be almost like two pit bulls rushing each other, locking up and then breaking apart. And it would go over and over and over again for 15 rounds like that. Whether Duran, unlike Arguello, would have went hard to Pryor's body was another story. And I tend to think that he would have, knowing what we know now. But again, Pryor would have gotten his pound of flesh off of Duran too. And this is the only one I would say would probably be a draw, or it would be like Ward and Kovalev, where we'd be arguing about who won the fight. And so I don't see a clear-cut winner in this one, and maybe even call it a draw, because I think both offenses would have offset each other. When it's slow like this, I'll do these dream fights and talk real in depth about them. I know most of you, only a couple hundred people are watching these videos now, up from 1,000. So unless I have Pacquiao in the comments, nobody's going to watch it. So that's going to about do it for this episode. I'll be back after the New Year. Happy New Year, everybody, and we'll look forward to a great 2017.